Hello, PEP students. This is an informational video on formatting documents in the proper MLA format using Microsoft Word. Different computers and different Word programs might look slightly differently than what you see in front of you, but hopefully this tutorial will give you some guidance on how to set your document properly, so that your tutors will be pleased with the formatting and will not have to deduct points, because that's always difficult for us as tutors to have to deduct points for things as simple as MLA formatting. And it's important that you get into the habit of formatting correctly. I'm going to show you in this tutorial how to actually make your settings your default settings, so that every time you open a Word document, it will just automatically default to the correct settings. So the first thing we need to do is to change our font and our sizing to Times New Roman, and it needs to be 12 point. Okay, fairly simple to do. Next thing I want to check is my margins. So let's look at our margins. I purposefully set them wrong. They're set to moderate. The correct MLA formatting requirement is 1-inch margins all around. And in my experience, this is the default setting for Microsoft Word, but just in case you're not sure, you can go to Custom Margins, and you can, whoops, that's the wrong way. You can go to set everything to 1 inch. And then if you just do it as your default settings, and yes, I want to change all subsequent documents. Now everything I open in the normal document page will be defaulted to the 1-inch margins all around. Go back to home. I can't remember if I set I don't think I set my font to default, so I'm going to do that now. If you go under the font tab, you can just check and make sure that everything is highlighted correctly, that it's Times New Roman 12 point, and then once again I can set that as my default. And yes, I want all documents set that way, so that every time I open up a Word document, it will default to the correct MLA formatting. All right, so 1-inch margins all around, Times New Roman 12 point. I'm going to purposefully not mess with my line spacing quite yet, because I want to show you what happens when it's incorrect. Okay, so my heading. This is the format of my heading. It's my student first name and whoops, I didn't spell that correctly. First and last name. This would be your first and last name, okay? And then it's going to be your tutor name. In my case, I'm just going to put my name down. It's Miss Lee's. That's what I would like them to be calling me. And then your class name. I'm just going to put Course C Comp Lit. It's one of the classes I tutor, but you would put whatever class it is that you are writing this assignment for. And then you would put the date that you are submitting it, which hopefully is the due date, hopefully not later than the due date. But this is the form it should take. So I'm going to pretend that today is my due date. So I'm going to put 7 August 2018. That is the form, okay? Don't abbreviate. Don't put 8/7/18. This is how we want you to format it, okay? All right, so then I press 1 enter. Notice that every time I'm pressing enter, I'm just pressing it once, okay? I'm not going to have more spaces between my heading and my title than I do for the body of my paragraph, of my essay, okay? So right now I'm going to center my title. And yes, the title needs to be centered, but other than centering, nothing else will be done to it. It will be boring, just like the rest of the font. It will be 12 point Times New Roman. You're not going to underline, you're not going to boldface, you're not going to pick some cool font. It's just going to be the same as the rest of your paper. So if you want to be creative in the wording that you use, not the actual style of the text. All right, then I'm going to press enter one more time. Notice I'm only pressing it once, because you do not want more space between the title and the body of your essay or assignment than anything else. It needs to all be uniform, okay? So I'm going to pretend that I'm typing an essay, all right? So I have to tab for my paragraph. Paragraphs need to be indented 1/2 inch, which is the standard setting on Microsoft Word. So you shouldn't have to fool with that. And then I'm going to start typing. And I'm just going to type gibberish. Okay, pretend that is an actual paragraph. The computer's getting a little confused by it, but we'll just pretend. So then if I'm going to paragraph 2, I would press enter and then another tab, and then I'd start typing again. Oops, it got really confused there. Let me just go like that. All right. And then pretend that's the end of my second paragraph, and I'm entering again. Now notice that there's a lot more spacing here and here and here and here and here than there is. It's just not uniform at all, right? There's more spacing some places, less spacing other places. So I'm going to highlight the whole thing, and that way you'll be able to see how it changes when I actually have the correct settings. Okay, so now we go to paragraph settings. Wherever the paragraph tab is in your particular version of Microsoft Word, that's what you want to look for. I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to look at this, and immediately I see that my line spacing is not correct. MLA formatting requires double spacing, so I'm going to change that to double spacing. Notice it did not change it yet because I have not pressed OK. I'm not going to do that until I have everything set correctly. So this little spacing thing right here, I do not want extra space between paragraphs. And I do not want this to be anything other than 0. I don't even know what auto means, so I'm not going to put it there. Okay, so notice what happens to my text when I have it double spaced and there's no spacing between paragraphs. There's no spacing extra spacing when I press enter. And look how uniform everything looks all of a sudden, okay? So that's what you want to make sure you do. Now, I'm going to click down here, make sure that my settings are still consistent, which they should be. Yes, double, 00, checked box. Now I'm going to set this as my default. Now, the reason I went through that extra step, which might seem like overkill, but I do want to set this as my default so that the next time I open a document, it's not going to give me extra spacing. Everything's going to be double spaced uniformly. And remember, you're not going to manually type more than one enter ever, okay? It's always just going to be one enter in any of these places. So the reason I did that extra step was because on a previous take of this particular video, when I went to paragraphs and I changed the setting and I just set as default the first time through, and then I went through again and checked it and it had changed my settings back. So I would recommend just press OK and then the first time, and then go back in and then set it as your default. For some reason, paragraph spacing settings are just very temperamental. I'm not exactly sure why. I'm not a computer person, so I couldn't tell you why. And maybe I was doing something wrong. But anyways, as much as you can set as default the correct settings, you want to do that because it's going to save you hassle in the end. All right, so now the next thing we need to think about is our header, which if I double click up here, it brings me to this little header domain, okay, which is within this top inch. Remember, your margins are 1 inch, okay, so within this top inch is your header. My cursor is already, I notice, at 1/2 inch from the top. So now MLA requires that you have a page number in the upper right-hand corner. So I go to page number and then top of page, and then I'm going to pick this one, which happens to be called plain number 3, but it puts my page number in the upper right-hand corner. Notice my cursor is to the left of the page number, and the reason for that is I'm going to type my last name with a space. If you happen to have a sibling in your class, you might want to put first initial and then last name. Ask your tutor what they want you to do for that. But my last name, space, page number, the computer Word will automatically generate that page number on the subsequent pages. It will be page 2, page 3, that kind of thing. And your name, your last name will carry over onto the other pages. That's the purpose of having a header. A couple things I want to point out. Number one, you want to do this in your header setting. Do not try to manually, squeeze that margin up to the 1/2 inch and then manually type your last name and a page number, and then on page 2 you have to manually type your last name and a page number. That is just such a headache. It's so much easier to set it in your actual heading setters. Header setting, okay? You're going to save yourself a lot of time and hassle, and you're going to have less formatting errors than if you try to do it manually. The other thing I want to point out is, notice my font. If I click on here and then hit the home button, you're going to notice that my font is 12 point Times New Roman. The only reason for that is because when I created my actual document, and when I set the font for my actual document, I set 12 point Times New Roman as my default font. If I had not done that, then once I get into my header, it would be at the old font. So if you just go in here and change for this document only, you're going to get up into your header and it's going to be the incorrect font, and you're going to forget to change that. Now you could manually highlight it and then change the font and the size, and it would change that on this document for all of your headers. But the problem is, every subsequent document, if you don't remember to do that, you're going to have the wrong font and sizing up there. So my recommendation is you change your default settings to the correct MLA settings, and then you're never going to have to worry about that, okay? That is a very common mistake that I've seen in my students, is the wrong font and sizing in the header, okay? And then the other very common mistake is the extra spacing. Usually students will get the double spacing correct, but they forget to take away that extra spacing that Microsoft automatically puts in there for some unknown reason. So just check all that stuff, and as much as you can set the correct settings as MLA format settings, you're just going to save yourself hassle in the end. Okay. All right, let me show you something else that's really handy, and that is, so pretend this is my essay that I've now completed. I don't think you'll ever write this short an essay for any class at PEP, but just pretend. And so my cursor's down here because it's the end of my essay, right? But let's say I want a works cited page. A really handy thing to do is to insert a page break at the end of your essay. And the reason for that is, if you have a page break here, then Microsoft Word will treat this page, your works cited page, and I'm going to title it works cited just so it doesn't get confusing. By the way, if you only have one work cited, it is called a work cited page. If you only have one book or source on there, if you have more than one source, it's a works cited page. Just a little finessing there, but important to know. So anyhow, Word treats this kind of as a separate document, even though it's saved under the same document, right? So that means any editing you do to your essay itself is not going to affect the format of this page, okay? If you didn't have that page break in there, let's say you added another couple paragraphs to your essay, you would have to go through and manually, click on your works cited title and bring it back up to the top of the page, make sure it's at that 1-inch margin, all that kind of stuff. If you put that page break in there at the end of your essay, then whatever editing you do up here is not going to affect your works cited page, okay? So that's a really handy thing to know. And then the other thing I'll say about works cited pages, let me show you this last little handy thing. And that is, so when I start my works cited page, I would want to go to the left margin after I write works cited. And then I'm going to show you under paragraph, under your paragraph tab, another MLA requirement is hanging indents for works cited pages. So on this version of Word, this is where I find it. It's under paragraph setting. So if you have a different version, it might be in a slightly different place, but you want to look under this indentation, and there should be a little box that you can click a drop-down menu, and you should find hanging indent somewhere in there, okay? And it should default to 1/2 inch, which is what it should be, so you don't need to change that. This is the one thing I do not want to set as my default, and the reason being, if I set that as my default for the document, it's going to change all of my indents on my entire document to hanging indents, and I don't want that. I only want that on my works cited page. So I'm just going to put OK for this particular page, all right? And then I'm going to start typing. So let's pretend this is my works cited page. Once again, I'm typing gibberish, but I'm going to just show you what it does on the next line. See how it did that? Okay, that's called a hanging indent. And then if I press enter and I type another, I don't know what this computer thinks I'm typing, but whoops, and it got all confused there. So I'm going to put a space. Okay, all right. So this is what your works cited page should look like. And we will talk about works cited pages in more detail probably in your classes, or there might be another tutorial video. But anyways, this is what it should look like. This is called a hanging indent because the first line is flush with the left margin, the second line indents. If you set that setting to hanging indent, it's going to be so much easier for you than if you have to actually go to your second line and press tab, and then sometimes that'll make it drag onto the third line and you have to go to that third line and press tab, and just the formatting can get really tricky if you're trying to do it manually. So if you can find the setting for hanging indents and do it that way, that is so much easier, okay? Than trying to do it manually. All right, so hopefully that answers a lot, if not all, of your questions on MLA formatting, and hopefully you will get everything correct, and your tutors will not have to take off any points for incorrect formatting from this point forward. Have a great school year.